My name is Kees Leijenhorst. On behalf of Radboud Reflects and uitgeverij De Bezige, welcome to this evening on social class. We've grown very sensitive to all kinds of inequalities, race, gender, all kinds of inequalities that we find morally unacceptable, that we want to combat, that we play a role in the political scene. But there's one inequality that remains a little bit in the shadows, that we usually do not address consciously, and that's class, especially in this country, which, at least in some bubbles, of which I'm unfortunate to be a member of, finds itself very progressive and equal in egalitarian. Social class is not really an issue. It's something you overlook. But can it be overlooked? Doesn't social class play a much larger and more important role than we tend to think of, than we want to think of? And what is social class? How does social class work? How does it reproduce itself? And what is the future of a class society? Is the concept of a classless society a dream that many people, politicians, philosophers have been dreaming for a very long time? Is this dream actually viable? Are we ever going to get rid of class prejudice and class mechanisms and all that kind of thing? This is what we're going to discuss today. And we do this with a very eminent philosopher, Hanno Sauer, who teaches philosophy at Utrecht University here in the Netherlands, as you know, who happens to have written an entire book about it, which also happens to be translated into Dutch from the original German. The original German is Klasse, die Entstehung von oben und unten. The Dutch reads Klasse, het ontstaan van boven en onder, appears with De Bezige. Read all about it, and especially you will go and buy this and read it after this lecture tonight, I'm sure of that. Hanno Sauer, who previously wrote a book on the history of morality, for which he also came here in the Radboud Reflects program and gave a lecture. But today we're not going to speak about morals. Well, we probably are in some way or other, but the main issue will be class. Hanno is going to give a lecture, a 30-minute lecture. After that, Hanno and I will have a discussion, and after that you can ask your questions at the end of this evening's program. There are going to be a set of very short set of rules, short but very strict, very strict. But I'm going to tell you all about that when we come to it, because by the time we come to it, you will have forgotten about these rules, because the lecture is going to be so entertaining. Again, on behalf of Radboud Reflects and De Bezige, I wish you a very nice evening, and I give the floor to Hanno Sauer.
Thank you all for coming. I can hardly see you.
Now you can.
Now I can, indeed. It's very, very nice to be here. Thanks to the organizers, thanks to Radboud University for inviting me, and I hope it will be interesting and perhaps also entertaining what I have to say about class and status, where they come from and why they are so hard to get rid of. That's from the cover of the German version. And as you know, restaurants or hotels or events, when they try to advertise themselves to you and they try to entice you to think that they are interesting and fascinating, they almost always say that this restaurant is exclusive. This hotel is exclusive. This event is exclusive. But when you think about it, that's kind of strange, because exclusive literally means we discriminate. It means we exclude people. This is for the privileged. This is rare. This is hard to access. That's what exclusive means. You see a picture here of Institut auf der Rosenhöhe, often described as the most expensive private school in the world. And of course, the education is going to be roughly the same, right? Much of the value of attending this school comes from the exclusivity. And so you see that we value that a great deal, and simply calling something exclusive or hearing that it's described as exclusive does in fact make it seem desirable to us. And so our psychology seems to be deeply attuned to cues of prestige and class and status and exclusivity. Here you see a license plate. Now, in the small state of Delaware, on the US East Coast, there is a peculiar thing going on with license plates of cars. Namely, you can trade them. You can buy and sell them. There are even auctions. And in fact, this particular license plate, that's the best picture I could find of it, this particular license plate with the number 6, traded in 2018 for $675,000. And the question is why? So the curious thing about license plates in Delaware is that they were issued consecutively. So the first car that got a license plate in the state of Delaware got the 1. In fact, I think it's the senator that has the 1. So the first car that got licensed got the 2. So 6 would be one of the earliest license plates that were ever issued in Delaware, which means either you come from a family that was among the first in Delaware to even have a car, so it means you can signal old money, pedigree kind of status, or it means that you can now afford to buy one of these rarefied license plates at auction. And it's a nice example because you almost never find an example for a pure status symbol, right? Even watches and cars and houses, they still have some kind of use value, right? They tell the time, you can live in them, you can travel in them, and so on and so on and so on. But this license plate does nothing above being a license plate. It gives you no extra privileges, it grants you no extra rights. It's just a license plate. It looks the same. It's purely the value that it has as a status symbol that makes it desirable to people and that made someone pay $675,000 for it. So class and status are very important, it seems to us, in our lives. And Case already mentioned that in the past 10, 15, 20 and more years, but increasingly over the past 10 years, we have talked a lot about social inequality and marginalization and discrimination and social injustice, and rightly so. And we talked about these things, again, rightly so, legitimately so, in terms of ableism and sexism and racism, but often at the same time people were saying maybe we are missing really what's fundamentally at stake here, because we only care about racism and ableism and sexism to the extent that they affect people's lives. Which is to say, we only care about these things to the extent that they affect people's socioeconomic status, right? If skin color were like eye color, we wouldn't care about it. If it were politically innocent. We only care about it because it makes a difference to people's socioeconomic status. And indeed, there are studies now, I don't know if you can see it, where you can actually psychologically provide evidence that people's classist attitudes overshadow and trump people's racist attitudes. So when you show people pictures of people with different skin color, but also different class markers, lower class, middle class, and upper class. The class information will color people's judgments and positive or negative evaluation about people more than skin color will. So class, it's actually psychologically appears to be true that class is more important than race, and we should talk about it more if we want to understand social inequality and social injustice. And I already said that we are psychologically, it seems that we are deeply attuned to perceiving prestige, reputation, class, and status, it's very natural to us. It's very automatic, it's very rapid, and we are very, very good at identifying class markers. There's a very, very new study that was done at Yale University where people could show that you are good at gauging people's class, even if the only information you get about them is how they pronounce 7 completely unrelated words. So if you just hear a tape of people who just say this, and, from, thought, beautiful, imagine, yellow, the, you will be able to guess their socioeconomic status. And likewise, it's going to be different words in the Netherlands, of course, but you see how little information we need to evaluate people's class. If you show people a video of someone who just moves for 30 seconds, they can guess their socioeconomic status. And that means that you will be able to guess people's socioeconomic status just by looking at 30 seconds of footage of how someone enters a room, essentially. Now, what is class? In my book, I propose an understanding of class according to which it is socially constructed scarcity. Some things are rare, right? Diamonds are rare. Other things are just finite resources, right? Other things are not naturally rare. Cars you can make more of. Fridges you can make more of. Chairs you can make more of. But some things are scarce not because they are naturally rare, but because we make them so. So desirable real estate, for instance, is rare because that's how we built cities, right? Being cool is rare because it's only something that a few people can be. These are examples for scarcity that is social in nature. It's socially constructed scarcity, and the most important type of socially constructed scarcity there is membership in class and status hierarchies. Positional scarcity, as economists often call it. Now, of course, when it comes to social justice, the question that we are interested in is, can we do anything about it? Can we get rid of classes? Can we perhaps even usher in utopia, paradise, and can we eliminate class hierarchy entirely? Because we care about it, and it's disadvantage. It is an injustice for class and status hierarchies to exist. Now, why do classes exist in the first place? According to Marx, classes emerge from class struggle. Classes emerge because there is competition over how to divide the economic surplus. Right? Societies generate something extra. They generate an economic surplus of wealth, and once you have that, class struggle emerges because different groups want to appropriate the largest possible share of that surplus. Which means, at the same time, according to Marx, that capitalism is going to dig its own grave. Because Marx was, surprising to many, a huge fan of capitalism, if it goes away at some point. Because capitalism creates wealth, it creates abundance, it creates an enormous amount of goods and resources. And so there's going to come a point where capitalist abundance is going to make class struggle over these resources obsolete, because there's abundance for everyone. And once you have that, you have one of the important conditions that render class society obsolete, because you don't need that class struggle anymore, because there's more than enough for anyone and everyone. But I think Marx was wrong, and he was in full clarity, for the first time, decisively shown to be wrong, at least in this one regard, by a somewhat less well-known economist, American-Norwegian economist named Thorstein Veblen, who wrote an amazing book that's called Theory of the Leisure Class from 1899, where he coined, among many, many, many other things, he coined a term that maybe some of you have heard, namely the term conspicuous consumption. So Veblen thought that it's precisely this thing of capitalism creating abundance and thereby eliminating inadvertently class society, that's never going to happen because so much of our consumption is conspicuous. People with big houses, they don't employ 20 people of staff because it's practical, right? They employ them to show that they can afford to employ them. It's conspicuous consumption. The expensiveness and wastefulness of a lot of consumption is not a bug, it's a feature. We want to engage in conspicuous consumption, even in conspicuous waste, in order to outcompete other people in a positional hierarchy, the existence of which cannot be placated or alleviated or eliminated by material abundance, because it's an immaterial type of socially constructed scarcity that people create with their status competition. So I think class is a kind of socially constructed scarcity, and classes are social groups that you can put into a hierarchy that is produced by status competition with so-called costly social signals or hard-to-fake social signals, and I will try to explain to you how this framework basically works and why it means that classes are here to stay. So social signals, the information that we communicate about ourselves to other people, need to be hard to fake, because sometimes we want to communicate information about ourselves, about latent properties, right? Latent traits that cannot be directly observed. So it may be that I want to communicate to you that I'm very smart, and I want to do that in a way that's believable to you. So when I keep making smart comments or witty remarks or good jokes, that's going to be a reliable signal that signals to you my underlying feature of being smart and quick-witted and mentally nimble, because it's hard to fake. If you don't actually possess the underlying latent trait, you wouldn't be able to do what I did, right? So these costly signals are signals that are such that in order to be able to send the signal at all, you must generally possess the underlying trait that the signal is about. It's the costliness that makes these signals hard to fake. And you can think of, how status symbols work. Basically, the logic behind prestigious university degrees and expensive watches or certain cultural habitus, as Pierre Bourdieu would describe it in his book The Distinction from the 70s, which is also amazing and highly recommended when it comes to understanding social class. These are all about costly social signals, and we engage in status competition with these hard-to-fake social signals. You basically have a structure where you have two types of senders. You have a high type and a low type, and a receiver on the other hand. And the idea is that the signal can only be sent by the high type. The low type cannot afford to send it, or is unable to send it, which makes the information sent out, conveyed by the high type, reliable to the receiver. And it can be fitness, it can be genetic fitness, it can be intelligence, it can be any kind of desirable quality that you want to communicate to other people. It can be moral integrity and trustworthiness. Basically, I am a smart and trustworthy partner for cooperation, is what people try to communicate about themselves. But these are not directly observable traits, so you want to have these hard-to-fake social signals that can still communicate these things about yourself. Now it gets more complicated. You see, and this is a phenomenon that's been noted very often, this is a picture of a famous tech billionaire. There are entire games online that you can play. A billionaire, a homeless person. This is counter-signaling. Because now imagine a situation where you have three types of senders and one receiver. Right? You have a high-type sender, you have a medium-type sender, and you have a low-type sender. Now, all of a sudden, the high type cannot distinguish itself anymore from the medium type by sending the same kinds of status signals, like expensive watches and cars, to distinguish themselves from the low type. At the same time, the distance between the high type and the low type is so large that there is no real risk for the high type to be mistaken for or confused with the low type. So all of a sudden, things collapse, and the high type can now afford to send a new kind of costly signal, which is to dress like the low type, right? Which is to say, engage in counter signaling. Because as a billionaire who's known to be a billionaire, there's no risk of being confused with an actual poor person, right? But at the same time, you can't distinguish yourself from an actual poor person by wearing a gold watch, which is gauche and middle class. So you can afford to engage in signaling that would typically be associated with the low type, simply because you unquestionably belong to the high type. And you see that that's the logic basically behind inconspicuous consumption. So the more you move up the class and status hierarchy, you see that people will be less flashy. They won't drive a Lamborghini. They won't have a very conspicuous watch. They will drive a normal car. They won't have, expensive jewelry, perhaps. And if so, it's very, very subtle, and it's very, nonchalant. This is inconspicuous consumption, and the logic of that is spelled out by this logic of hard-to-fake signals, and it's its own type of hard-to-fake costly signal to be able to afford not to send costly signals, but to avoid sending them and to be understated and removed and subtle. And now it gets more complicated still. Because imagine a situation where you don't just have 3 types of senders and 1 receiver, but 3 types of senders and 2 types of receivers. Because sometimes you have a situation where the high type sender wants to send a signal that only some people in the audience will even be able to detect as a signal, right? These types of costly signals are called buried signals. They are hard to detect, hard to fake signals. And they are signals that are conveyed to only a part of the audience, and they are conveyed in a way where the fact that they have been made hard to detect and only discoverable for only a segment of the audience is attached to them as information. So I'm basically signaling to you, this is just for you and not for them, because only you and me know what this is about, right? And I'm telling you that we belong to the same club, so to speak, by sending a signal to you that I have buried for you because I know that you would find it. This jacket costs $27,000. It's by a famous brand that played a role in a well-known TV show, Succession. That's about these sorts of questions, and you can not tell, right? It's only if you know the brand and if you've seen it before that you'll be able to recognize. And the same applies to vintage watches and also a certain type of accent that people master or words that people know that create that kind of exclusivity. And I think that if we ask ourselves, how many social classes are there even to begin with? And if we think that class is socially constructed scarcity generated by status competition with different types of hard-to-fake social signals, then I think that the natural account of how many classes there are is that there are 4. In the literature, you find everything. You find people who say that there are no classes. You find people who say that there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all sorts of classes, or even more. But I think the correct answer to how many classes there are is there are 4, and basically it emerges from this picture, which is that there's going to be a class of people who basically cannot meaningfully participate in the status dynamics that I just described. There's going to be a group of people, size can vary, right? There's going to be a group of people who can participate in these status competitions and does. There's going to be a group of people who can participate in status competition and they don't. And there's going to be a group of people who values exclusivity above all else. So they do participate in it, but only amongst themselves and only conspicuously for people who are in the know. So what can we do about it? I think it is underappreciated what a tricky problem this is. In political philosophy, people talk a lot about justice, as they should. But in almost all cases, it's distributive justice, meaning who gets what and how much of it. It can be money, resources, chances, wealth, whatever you think the metric of justice is. And people talk about that because you can, in principle, redistribute it. When I have 100 euros in my pocket, you can take 50 of those and give them to someone else. It's possible. And we do it. And in many cases, it's fine and good that we do that. The problem is that prestige and status are not like that. So the traditional political levers, the traditional political means of intervention simply do not function against these symbolic, immaterial status hierarchies. You can't take my prestige and take half of it and give it to someone else, right? So redistribution doesn't work against status hierarchy. In fact, it often makes things worse because there is a phenomenon called welfare stigma, which is that being on the receiving end of these measures of redistribution is itself a status injury, right? People don't brag about that they receive welfare or some sort of assistance. It may be bad that it's a status injury, but that's what it in fact comes down to. And also, in many cases, you can deal with problems of distribution simply by making more stuff. There was a time when only few people had a TV, right? Only one person in the street, only one family in the street had a television set. Well, you can make more TV sets, and now everyone has one. Everyone who wants one has one. But economic growth of this sort is not available in the case of prestige. You can't say, okay, the 10% of the people at the top, they have a certain amount of prestige and status markers. So we just need to make more of that prestige and give it to more people until 100% of people are upper class. It doesn't work that way because it's essentially a relative, a positional idea. It's a ranking. And you cannot, rankings are zero-sum, which means that in order for anyone to move up in the hierarchy, someone else must be bumped down, right? Because that's what up means in a relative positional hierarchy. It's to outcompete someone else. So it's essentially a game that cannot be dealt with the traditional levers of redistribution and economic growth. And in many cases, things become worse because receiving welfare assistance is considered stigmatizing. And indeed, the richer societies get, the more intense these status competitions over immaterial resources and ranking become. So as economic growth continues, and it likely will, status competition is going to become a bigger problem, not a smaller one. And we know from many studies, many recent studies with really the most rigorous and best available methods, that social status, socioeconomic status, is extremely persistent. It's ubiquitous. You find it everywhere. It shapes everything about you, how you talk, the friends you hang out with, the friends you want to hang out with, the person you're going to marry or have married, the job that you choose, how long you're going to live, where you're going to live. It shapes everything about you. And it's very persistent. Here's just one example of a study that looks at the past 400 years in the UK. And you see it's persistent because there seem to be mechanisms in place that generate these socioeconomic inequalities that are, it's not entirely clear how they really work, but they appear to be highly heritable. So you see, in this case, you see two lines. Well, actually, you don't see two lines because they are perfectly overlapping. And these two lines are, if you take two people, any two people, then the value of the house they live in will be correlated in exactly the same degree to which they are related. So you see the two lines of relatedness and the correlation of people's house value are exactly identical. And it's been like that over the past at least 400 years. And indeed, what this study found was not just that you find these correlations, but also, and this is very surprising, also that despite everything that happened, the French Revolution, all these wars, general education, feminist revolution, civil rights, despite all of these massive social changes and transformations and developments, the degree, the rate of heritability, so how heritable socioeconomic status was, has remained entirely unchanged. So how strongly socioeconomic status is transmitted from one generation to the next has been unaffected by all of these things, which is a very troubling finding. And there seems to be something about the way that our society, or societies in general, because we find it universally and everywhere, generates class and status inequality that is very, very hard to get rid of. And if this is true, then it's useful to know about it, and it may be useful to grow accustomed to the idea that we may have to live, to some extent at least, with class and status inequality. Because when generation of politician after generation of politician keeps promising that they will get rid of the kind of social inequality that stings and really hurts, and generation of politician after generation of politician fails at doing so, it can create a kind of political paranoia where people think that we are being lied to, we are being deceived. Either they don't want to get rid of social inequality to begin with, or these politicians do want to, but there's some other hidden, more powerful force that is stopping them. And that kind of political paranoia can have often disastrous consequences. So it's very much worth understanding where social class and status come from and why it is that they are so hard to eliminate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe a first question. I prepared this program within this academic bubble I happen to be a part of.
Yeah. Me too.
And you too. There were quite some people actually I talked to, and I said I was going to interview you, and they said, class, is that really an issue? So these are people that are very much into racial inequality, very much into gender inequality, about combating it, of course.
Yeah.
And it somehow generated a kind of uneasiness. The very topic,
yeah.
The topic of, are we a class? Is there a class? That's not really the issue anymore. Yeah. Can you, so a kind of bad faith, if you believe your story and you believe that class is really a very persistent and important and hard to beat thing, then these people are turning a blind eye to. Why are they doing? Why is it such a
so I think this is. So I'm not saying, and I don't believe that racism and sexism and ableism don't exist. I think they are genuine forces in their own right. It's just interesting to see that often they will be confounded with or underwritten by a more fundamental phenomenon. Not always. There are also distinct types of racism and misogyny and ableism and so on and so on. So it doesn't always reduce to class hierarchy. But I think that's what creates a lot of the anxiety. It's as if someone was trying to say the problems you care about don't matter, and I think that's not what's happening in the book at all. It's just, it tries to take this idea of class and run with it and try to make it really, really strong. And so it's true that I end up de-emphasizing these types of racial and sexual inequalities, because that's what I think is the truth. But it doesn't explain them away, or it doesn't dismiss them. It still does exist, and it's worth talking about and worth addressing, and so on and so on. I think that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from. But don't worry, it's fine.
Yeah. A further question: what to do with the notion of upward mobility? I think in many countries, in many societies, also this one in the Netherlands, but certainly also the United States, which we're going to talk about also shortly. Yeah. The idea is that you can leave your class behind if you get an education, with an education you get a proper job, higher paid, and so you move upward through the classes. And there's also this idea that quality of education has improved over the years. Isn't this a class abolisher? But your point is no, it isn't, because these classes still persist. How can
it almost couldn't be. It almost couldn't be a class abolisher, because each person can move up, but not everyone, right? So it's true that if you come from a certain social background, then you get an education, or something happens, or you have a good idea, or whatever, you can move up in class. It's difficult enough, and it takes a long time. But of course, when everyone gets an education, then no one's better off, relatively speaking. You're going to be better off because you have better education, right? So in absolute terms, yes, but in positional, relative terms, you haven't escaped this struggle for prestige and status. So it's not a general solution. It's not like by getting everyone educated. It's a benefit, but it doesn't do anything when it comes to relative class position. Now, I think social mobility is important and a good idea. Modern societies should be structured in such a way that social mobility exists. Ideally, we want as much social mobility upwards as possible, and as little social mobility downwards as possible. So there should be a reliable floor that protects people from falling underneath a certain type of social minimum. The famous German philosopher Hegel said that that's never going to fully work. Because there's always going to be, because the standards for what the social minimum is, they are also malleable and they rise. So they're always going to be set in such a way that there's always going to be some group of people that falls under them. And I think that's essentially correct. So it's not really possible to have a society where no one falls through the cracks, but it's still very much worthwhile to think about how that group can be as small as possible, right? And so social mobility is important, I think, and we should try to get rid of social structures and practices and institutions that reduce social mobility, that make the class hierarchies that inevitably are going to exist in some form even more robust and even more durable and even less permeable. So that's all. These are all good ideas, but it's not a general solution for getting rid of these social groups. You can just make transition between them easier.
And I think a related question, you talk about social status and all this signaling and that kind of stuff, which is very much symbolic. It's very much on, let's say, the cultural level and less on the level Karl Marx, whom you mentioned also in the book, talk a lot about, where it's simply, haves and have-nots. It's about having money.
Exactly, capital versus labor.
Capital versus labor. But if I think of your four classes, let's say the most deprived one, which is in the system you have just sketched, which cannot send these signals because they don't have prestige. That happens to be the class that has no money. So, so isn't Karl Marx right then in the end? Because it's still the Hillary Clinton said the deplorables. It's the have-nots who are unable to send all these signals that it was Zuckerberg, wasn't it?
This was Sam Bankman-Fried.
Wrong. We had a bet.
So he had a kind of class mobility of his own kind over the past couple of years.
So it was not Zuckerberg. Okay, but anyway,
but Zuckerberg used to do the same thing.
Yes.
Not quite the homeless chic type, but he would do the thing where he says, "My time is so valuable, I always wear the same thing." Right? So he would have like 50 great T-shirts. But of course, you notice that as that became a trend to sort of signal how busy you are and important to sort of like, I can't really be bothered to. As that became more important, more people did it. He's now switched to and like collecting watches and sitting at fashion shows and so on and so on. And so on. So it's always going back and forth. But I want to answer this because it's a very important question. I mean, in my defense, there's one chapter in the book that's called money. So it can't be that I don't care about it. But it's true that I think that I'm a big fan of Marx. He's a great writer and a great thinker and very, very important. But I think he was just wrong about this economic reductivism about class, that it's basically, do you live off your own labor or someone else's labor, but class as a purely economic phenomenon. I think that status competition is the more fundamental explanatory concept. Now, you're right. It does take money and resources to participate in these types of things. So how should we think about the connection between these two? And I think that money and capital and wealth are very, very important as a type of currency in the status game. But you can see that it can't be money in and of itself, because money contributes to your class position only to the extent that it sends the right signal about you. Right? So you can become very wealthy as someone who owns 50 brothels, right? But you're not going to tell the parents of your kids' friends about that, right? You can be very wealthy as an arms dealer. You can be very wealthy as a criminal, right? But none of these things would, if known, contribute or raise your status position, because the money doesn't tell the right story about these latent qualities that you have. You need to acquire your money in a sort of way that is understood to be broadly legitimate. Is it legitimate or not? I'm not saying anything about that. But in a way that is, socially understood to be legitimate. And so I think status competition with hard-to-fake signals is the more fundamental concept. And then money acquired in the right way, money with the right meaning attached to it, is one of the most important ways in which people engage in status competition. But it goes through this semantic filter first, such that it's not purely the capital that you own, but it must be bound up with the sort of a certain story that it tells about you.
Yeah. At the end of your book, you do refer again to Karl Marx. There's a nice pun with the end of your book and the end of Das Kapital. Read the book and you notice I'm not going to verklappen. But there was something funny about the book, and maybe I misunderstood, so you have to enlighten me. Because on the one hand, you make the point that this dream, which is also the Marxist dream of a classless society, a society where in which classes have been abolished and we all happily live together. You very much show that this really is a dream, but it's an idle dream. We're never going to achieve it. On the other hand, you give a few rules, and they're actually numbered, I think, in the end, in which we can actually seriously work against the kind of class inequality that you have been discussing all along. I don't quite get the connection between the two. You are a skeptic about the possibility of a classless society. On the other hand, you seem to tell us we should work our way towards more equality. How does this connect?
Right. I mean, even idle dreams can be worth dreaming. For the direction they give you. And I think what I try to do is to show that let's not focus our efforts on trying to get rid of social inequality in general, because I really think if you look at it thoroughly, as I try to do, that's not something that's going to work. And once we realize that, we can then look at these various keyhole solutions that more specifically address the negative consequences of these class structures, and we can at least moderate the problem a little bit, or soften it, or minimize it a little bit. And then I make a couple of suggestions. High quality public goods and public infrastructure, and continuing to focus on healthy economic growth, for instance, is also a good idea. And I think also it's striking. I mentioned in the beginning how strange and bizarre in a way it is that we use exclusive as as a word of praise, when not excluding other kids is pretty much the first lesson that we try to teach our kids, right? It's unpleasant, it's mean, it's a vice to be a bully and to exclude other kids. You don't have to be friends with everyone, right? But you don't have to go out of your way to exclude people. And yet that's what these restaurants and hotels literally do, right? Is that we don't let most people in. That's kind of strange. And it also, over the past years, people have thought about racism and sexism and ableism, and a lot of the effort here was focused on how can we come up with a more inclusive language, right? How can we address each other in a way that is more in line with our political goals, more in line with our vision of social justice. And I think, I really think that I literally not once heard anyone say we should think about terms like vulgar and tokkie, right? Because we just say that, that's, in Germany you would say that's a little bit Assi, people freely use these words, right? They say like that's the bad part of town. What the hell does that mean, right? We would never talk like that if it were.
It's a part where the talkies.
And it's totally official, and no one even notices it, right? And it's very striking when you think about it, because it is a type of undeserved disadvantage, right? There are many young children who live in the Assi Viertel in a German city, for instance, and it's through no fault of their own, and it has great impact on their life. And to double down on that by noticing that that's not a good neighborhood, or that's not a good family, and yet people are totally generous with it, and it's everywhere, and it's much more accepted officially than racism and sexism and ableism are. I like to give this example. It doesn't really work in Germany, because in Germany everyone watches films that are dubbed.
Yeah.
But when you watch The Lord of the Rings in the original English, the good guys, they sound like the upper middle and upper classes
Oxford.
in England.
All Oxford.
They sound like the south of England kind of educated accent. And the Orcs and the Uruk-hai, they speak like people from the East End or from North England.
Manchester,
right?
yeah.
And it's totally accepted, right? Yeah. And it's not just accepted, but it's consciously used as a just imagine, it's literally a group of people in real England, right? And you have these murderous, hideous monsters, and you want to convey about them how brutal and inhuman they are by making them speak like someone from East London. Yeah. It's ridiculous, right? And this is everywhere. In movies, you look at any romantic comedy, you have a very common trope where, the female hero needs to be redeemed by gaining the love and affection of whatever, the rich guy or something like that. And that makes her worthy of love. It would be unthinkable if you told that story in a racial way, right? The black girl needs to find approval from the white, and rightly so, right? So it's very, very curious that classist prejudice is extremely deep, it's extremely profound, extremely important, pervasive and ubiquitous, and totally socially accepted.
Now this comes from the society. There's probably no society in the Western world more obsessed by class than the English one.
Exactly, yeah.
So it comes from there. But talking about the English, we've had the UK, England and Wales have had the elections, and the landslide victory for ultra-right and actually ultra-left also. And you see this analysis. You briefly refer to it in your book also. This idea of the left betraying the Marxist terms, the proletariat, the lower classes. The left used to be the political parties that came up for the rights of the deprived, the lower classes. They have betrayed them because they've all become university-trained intellectuals, and the only thing they care about is the correct pronouns and the climate, which we're going to talk about as well. And no longer about the rights of the lower, the bad life of the lower class. And in England now too, Labour, which of course traditionally is representative of the lower class, especially in this class-obsessed society which England is, they have betrayed, and they're now all voting for this Nigel Farage. How do you relate to this? Because there too, you can have a classical Marxist analysis of this, of the left wing, the left wing parties growing out of their original position. But how does this relate with the status kind of thing you're talking about? And do you concur with this analysis, this idea of the left betraying?
Yes, I do. I mean, you often hear that diagnosis that instead of advocating for the concerns of real-life workers and the working class and so on and so on, they look down on the working class and tell them, actually, we say BIPOC now, that sort of thing, right? And using these markers of exclusivity, they make it harder to achieve social equality and social justice because people participate in these types of status competition, and they try to get ahead in status competition within their group, and so they try to outcompete each other by having the fancier jargon and the sometimes real, sometimes performatively groomed kind of, deeper sensibility towards social justice, right? I care more about equality than you. Right? Is already a paradoxical statement because it means that I want to outcompete you in terms of my degree of caring about equality. So I'm better than you because I care more about equality is a weird very combination of views. And it goes back a long time. You have the Champagne Socialist as an idea. It's a fascinating book. One of the few books on class that makes a similar move a little bit to mine. I mean, I plagiarized it from this book to some extent, so it's not like the other way around. It's George Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier, and George Orwell, he came from some kind of elite. He was Eton educated. He went to Oxbridge. I don't remember which, but he spoke a certain way. He behaved a certain way, and so on and so on. And he wanted to research how the genuine working class lives. So he went there and lived there, which is that's admirable, right? A lot of these types like you and me don't do that.
No. Not for a minute.
But even he writes, and it's fascinating to read, a highly recommended book, The Road to Wigan Pier, and he says, it's almost like a report that he writes to himself. Yes, I mean, socialism is great, and we need socialism, but man, these people smell bad. And it's like, and he describes sort of like, almost like, self-incriminating and and confessional. It's like, this is a genuine obstacle that I was sitting at the house of this person, and I was with a bunch of workers, and they were drinking from the same cup, some sort of hard liquor, and it made a round, and it was about to, and it made me want to vomit. He said, right? And of course, it wasn't a concern for them, right? It was just, it's so deeply ingrained in people that you feel like you are cut from a finer cloth than these people. It's a very, very profound obstacle to achieving social justice. And I think it's these kinds of phenomena that explain the sort of paradoxical advocacy or lack of advocacy for the concerns of the real working class, because they are stylistically not part of the elites who study at certain universities and talk a certain way, right? Because they want to talk about art, they want to be cool, and so on and so on. It's all inherently about distinction, and it's all inherently exclusionary. And so people are kidding themselves, I think, when they think that there's anything leftist about that.
Another question, these classes you talk about are still quite rigid. There are 4, and you have the high, and you have the low, and you have something in between. But you also mention, also in the book, but also now in your talk, you have fantastic examples of all kinds of status symbols, of all kinds of status signaling, especially now with the internet. I have the impression that there are so many different bubbles in which certain signals are being understood, and most of the time, I, for instance, have no idea. I have no receptors for these signals.
We just talked about this, right?
We just talked about this. All these online communities, I have no idea. You can signal whatever to me, I won't pick up the signals. So
I mean, we are all like that, right? None of us is like in the know with respect to these. But hundreds and thousands.
Doesn't that conflict with the rigid fourfold system that you just outlined, where you have 4? Isn't it much more dispersed?
Of course, of course. It's very schematic, right? And I sort of try to take this costly signaling idea and try to say, okay, how does society look when we really make it as strong as possible? Of course, you have these subgroups, you have milieux, you have. You can make more fine-grained distinctions, right? It's fine. This isn't like a chemistry. You have gold and helium. It's a distinction that we draw in order to understand society better. And there are these numerous subgroups and subcultures. I once read an article about a subculture. It must be on Reddit, on this forum.
Yeah.
There's like 300,000 members in this group, and the group is about people who like to have a little bit of sand in their pocket. Right?
Really?
There's 300,000 people, but you get it, right? It's right. You come from the beach. It's kind of pleasant, and there's some people who always want a little bit of sand in their pocket. And of course, probably there's like one of these guys is going to be the best sand in the pocket haver, right? And so there are status competitions like you can be the best pigeon breeder, you can be the best, and to a large extent that's good, because like I said, we can't make more status, right? We can't make everyone the top. So we can give a fridge to everyone in principle, or we can make available a fridge to everyone. But what we can do is that we can pluralize status hierarchies, right? So even if you're not rich and beautiful and famous, you can still be the best pigeon breeder. I think that's worth something, that everyone can excel in something. Well, really, there are some people who don't really excel in anything. So that's also a problem. That's
probably also
not gonna go away, probably. And really, I think there are. So the best pigeon breeder is going to know that their group position is not incommensurable with the sort of mainstream distinction, right? You can't really outcompete the richest person or the most beautiful person or the most famous person by being the best pigeon breeder, right? So there's still like a dominant 5 or 6 criteria of that really sort of outshine all the other things, and you can't create a new status hierarchy that would be equally valuable to those. And so I think it's still, in the end, the different currencies with which we engage in status competition, like money and beauty and fame and intelligence,
it's still dominant.
And are still going to dominate.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's good to have a rich society and a pluralistic society that can create all these subgroups, because people do derive satisfaction from that. And being low in a status hierarchy is extremely hurtful. Right? It's extremely important to us, probably also for evolutionary reasons. You know, losing your reputation and social standing 100,000 years ago would mean that once you break a leg, no one shares food with you. Right? So it's deeply ingrained in us to really care about social status, even when nothing bad really happened to you. Right? Just the stigma of being excluded is incredibly hurtful to people. We also talked about mass shooting events, for instance. Often they are motivated by people who are low in the, almost always. It's a kind of way for people to become famous. For once be in the spotlight, for once be seen, for once be recognized, for once be feared. And so I think these types of motives are really fundamental, and they are really behind, not everything of course, but behind many, many phenomena that we want to understand.
There's a, let's say, personal / sociological question I would like to ask you. Namely, you're German. You come from Germany. You teach in the Netherlands. You did your PhD in the Netherlands, so you know this country. You speak the language. The Dutch, at least, tended. In the past, I don't know any longer what the Dutch think, because they don't seem to exist anymore. But the Dutch always have thought of themselves as an egalitarian society, a society in which all these class differences, of course, they are there, but we're all in the same boat. Literally, this is very much a sea country. You come from a country where which is perhaps more egalitarian than the Dutch in reality. What do you think about it? Is this a myth? Do you recognize this myth? Have you come across it? So let's say a bit of participatory observation. How do you look at this society?
It's a myth. It's false.
Thank you.
It's a false belief. No modern large society has no classes. You always, because the logic of status competition cannot be neutralized, right? So that you're always going to have social groups that sort themselves roughly according to this logic. Of course, it's not the same in every country. Germany is going to work a little bit differently from the Netherlands. The Netherlands is going to work a little bit differently from the UK. UK, Canada, South Africa, India, they're all going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
So you see that the basic logic is always the same, but how it looks, how it feels, and the way that people create social inequality, that can be very different. It can be more or less racial. It can be more or less based on this or that, on origin or on place of residence. But the fundamental logic always stays the same. Of course, in Germany, one thing is that, of course, the traditional old money upper class tended to be in bed with the Nazis, so that created a little bit of discontinuity. Yes. And that's one thing. It's less centralized in Germany, where you don't have London, Paris, Amsterdam as the one place where you both find the old money elite and the Havermelk elite. But it does exist, of course, and you see it's very recognizable. I think it's so. I don't want to just mock it. I think there is value in publicly espousing egalitarian values, even when, as a matter of fact, much of your society doesn't really live up to these values. It can still be good to, in principle, we want to be an egalitarian society, and we find class hierarchy problematic. We benefit from it, of course, but we at least there's value in that, right? It's better than to be totally jingoistic about class hierarchies and think that of course I belong here, right? I'm better than you.
Yeah.
So that's at least good, but to the extent that people believe that in the Netherlands that we are not a class society, you are not a class society. I've been here too long.
Yeah. You may say we.
We are not a class society. Is of course false. It's understandable why people would say that. People say it in the US.
Yes.
For different reasons, because people often say that, especially when you talk to rich people, as I do a lot, they often say something. Oh, you go to the States, it's so great. They don't have this envy, right? You can flaunt your wealth and so on and so on. And I don't think that's true. They have different cultural norms around expressing envy, right? So when you see someone who's much richer than you, you're supposed to say, "Great job, man. One day I want to be." And so the norms around talking about wealth are different, but of course they have at least as much envy, likely more, because they have more inequality and more salient inequality. But they also have this idea that I love this line where someone once said that every American is just a temporarily embarrassed millionaire.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they all think that it's fine because I'm going to make it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Or my children.
And so, right. Yeah. Making a better life for them.
Yeah, for my children. Yeah.
And so, they have their own ideological reasons for denying the existence of class.
Now you shifted the discussion from the Netherlands to the United States.
Try to get out of it.
And now I want to pin you down on that, because I want to have namen en rugnummers. I want to have concrete examples.
All right.
Can you give us examples how much more classy we are than we may think we are?
I also want to say that because just to emphasize this again, I think this is also bound up with ethnic categories. So I know people who grew up, very financially comfortable in the right, outside kind of neighborhood in Amsterdam and so on and so on, but still. You're also supposed to look a certain way, and I think a lot of people will recognize what I mean. Now you have a particular kind of habitus, the kind of leisure activities you engage in, sports, for instance. There's one game that I learned about here is korfball.
Yeah.
And that's I think it turns out.
Is that elitist?
No, it's the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So that's considered a little bit.
We don't do korfball, no.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But there are places where you live,
we do hockey, field hockey.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're called Jan Dik.
And so I think, I mean, I don't have more intimate knowledge of everyone in this audience, but I think it's very it's very visible because it's also it tends to be relatively concentrated in a comparably small number of places that are sort of also have that cultural meaning. I think that people talk about. I mean, you do have a genuine aristocracy, right? There's a king.
Yeah, but he's so normal.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's sort of like because it conflicts with the egalitarian ideals, so it has to be extra inconspicuous.
Much more normal than King Charles.
Right. But of course, I mean, every time they break these norms of humility, they're in the news. I don't know when they sort of vacation under COVID rules or something.
Buying a holiday house in Greece.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of
very wrong move.
That's that sort of thing. And then they apologize, but they don't care.
No, of course not.
So that's how it works. So there's not that kind of like genuine actual nobility in Germany anymore. The people who belong to those families that used to be part of the nobility, they would like to think that, but it's been abolished with the Weimar Constitution. So it's a little bit different, but again, the fundamental logic is the same whether you're talking about the Indian caste system or Dutch in the year 2026. The Netherlands in the year 2026.